the rest. Okay. Thank you so much,
No,
Stacie.
thank you, Carlene. We were,
Okay.
Daniel and I were both supposed to remember and we forgot. So all the people have missed now are our introductions. So again, we will pause at 9:50 if you have any questions for Ahmad. So, and then again, I'll wrap up and we'll have a long, hopefully a long period for questions and answers. Okay, and if you notice, Daniel's asked to introduce yourself in the chat so we can keep track. And next slide, please, Daniel. So I just wanted to, again, do a little introduction. I mean, some of you, I know some of you already know a lot of this, but for those of you who are new, what exactly is a county cultural competence plan? So just in a nutshell, it's the standardized and detailed plan to reduce disparities by each county behavioral health department that must be submitted every 3 years to the state. They also must do an update every year. This requirement is in existing regulations, but it is not mandated by any legislation. Next slide. Then the history of the CCPs. Developed in 1990 by the County Ethnic Services Manager and Rachel Guerrero, who at that time was Chief of the Office of Multicultural Services under the California Department of Mental Health, which does not exist the same way, but in those days it was very robust and had almost everything mental health. So the first version of these cultural competence plan requirements was released in 1997. And then the passage of Proposition 63, or the Mental Health Services Act, in 2004 resulted in the counties getting a little reprieve, because up to that time, my math isn't good, I don't know how many plans they had to do, but they, in 2005, really mentioned their concerns to the department, and they were valid. They said, you know, we've been doing planning, robust planning with community stakeholders, and this MHSA to implement this MHSA is so difficult that we will not be able to give enough time to do a proper CCP, Old County Cultural Competence Plan. And so the department actually gave them a reprieve, and the next plan was not due until 2010. And next slide. But in 2012, the governor reorganized, and that's a polite word that we use. And again, I'm going to be very frank. Those of you who know me know that, especially with people I feel comfortable with, and I feel comfortable with all of you, by the way, only members of the CRDP have been invited to this presentation. I didn't invite REMHDCO or the community at large. It's just the CRDP folks. So again, I'm going to speak frankly. The governor reorganized the Department of Mental Health. I mean, other people would say he decimated it, but anyway, most of the functions of the Department of Mental Health were moved to other places. So the Office of Multicultural Services, which at that time was over the CRDP, were transferred to the Office of Health Equity under the California Department of Public Health. However, the oversight and responsibility of the CCPs was transferred to the California Department of Healthcare Services. And I think the next slide is Ahmad's, and he'll take it from there. And then after, just again, to make sure that Ahmad and Daniel have enough time, I will pick up the history because it's not quite as important. I just wanted you to get that background. So go ahead, Ahmad.
No problem. So just some of the things to understand as far as for the cultural competency plan requirements, the state still uses the term cultural competency, even though a lot of us have gone away or evolved. from the term cultural competency because it is, as a person who, has really embraced this kind of subject from, I don't know, years ago. My undergrad minor was ethnic studies. So this is like an area that I've been involved with forever. We've gone away from the term competency and trying to use things such as cultural humility, cultural responsiveness, culturally appropriate. But the state has still yet to catch up on these, which is kind of interesting when they want to advise us on things such as cultural humility and cultural responsive that they don't use the current terms. But so the folks in the county that are primarily responsible for the cultural competency plans are usually whoever is designated in the role of the ethnic service manager. Some counties are fortunate to where they have a dedicated full-time person who's an ethnic service manager. Some counties are even more fortunate where they have several staff on like a team that's dedicated to that work. Most of your small counties are not. It's going to be one person who's assigned that role as well as several other functions. So when I was in Kings County as a program manager, I was also the ethnic service manager for 9 years. And so I had everything from MHSA, I was the PIO, I was the contracts person, I was the compliance person, I was the prevention person, as well as the ESM. So they're wearing multiple hats. I noted the ESM in here as well as the MHSA coordinator because those are key people, because in some of the counties at one point there was 8 of us in California that were the ESM and the MHSA coordinator, which if you're going to wear multiple hats, that's probably the great one because MHSA gives us the greatest latitude in terms of how do we address underserved, inappropriately served, or just unserved communities. It gives us great flexibility, but the CCPs usually worked on or developed by your ESM or the quality assurance managers. So because the quality assurance managers come in twofolds. One, they tend to be the one that have the access to a lot of the data oftentimes. They're able to have the Medi-Cal penetration rates. They're able to pull a lot of the data that you're trying to include in the plan, as well as they're the ones that a lot of times are asked about the plan. So in terms of when you're doing your annual EQROs, when we have triennial audits, things of that sort, it's usually the quality assurance person that is kind of leading that process. And so they're the ones that have to put that plan forward. So in some counties, they have a more hands-on approach, and others, they provide more of a support role as far as the ESMs, the information that they need. And then, like I said, the MHSA coordinator in a number of counties is also that person that wears both hats. That comes in great when you're talking about like community planning process and program development. But when you're talking about like developing, if it happens in a year where you're developing your 3-year plan and you're having to do your annual updates for your cultural competency plan, it can be stressful. But I think those are the key people for our CDEPs to really identify and know. Most of our ethnic service managers, unless they're really new or people that are in that role are familiar at this point with the CRDPs, just because in the past year or so, year and a half, there was a lot of work to try to raise awareness around the CRDP, especially with the CRDP funding sunsetting soon. So it was, how do we get these things sustained? How do we get people involved? So there's been presentations and discussions both for the statewide ESM groups. The OAC has done some work and presentations around that a lot of the ESMs have seen. So the ESMs and the MHSA coordinators are probably a lot more familiar with the CRDPs than they had been maybe like 2 years ago. Just understanding that because these programs, the programs you guys have been running, have been primarily working with Department of Public Health and not DHCS, it's basically siloed a lot of your programs from the county. How would you call it? From our system of care. So it's kind of like a silo within this system of care. Not in all instances. And that's why I think if you're going to be reaching out to people, reaching out to the ESMs and MHSA coordinators is key. But the people who are driving the plans a lot of times are definitely your ESMs and possibly the quality assurance improvement people. So what are some of the roles? Some of their roles are obviously developing the cultural competency plans. In some counties, those are, well, let me rephrase that. With DHCS, in our opinion, those have been a checkbox. And I will say that to DHCS because in 11 years, since 2010, when we submitted our first one, they have not given us the new criteria. We have literally been doing annual updates to our plans for a decade. Now, some of us at some point just said, you know what, forget it. We're just going to start scratch and started, developing brand new plans 2-3 years ago. Tulare County, for example, I think about 5-6 years ago, when Angel was there, just said, forget this. We're just going to start a brand new plan versus doing updates. But so for a lot of counties, these are supposed to be living documents. They're things that we really want to be able to utilize and leverage and tell our story. And so again, it depends on the county. If you've got 50 things and this is number 50 on a priority list of 49, it may have more of a checkbox feel. I can't speak to, like I said, every county and what they do, but overall, most counties really treat these as an important function in guiding their efforts. This is really where hopefully if you're utilizing if you have good data and you're using your plan in a way that you want it to be a living document, it'll help inform what some of your health disparities and inequities are and help you strategize how to address those. The next bullet under, you say the MHSA plans. I think those things can be tied together because if you're doing your cultural competency plan and you're identifying some health disparities or gaps in your service, either in your annual updates or in your 3-year plannings, your MHSA plan could provide you with some options to do that, especially when you get into either specific areas of prevention and early intervention. Right now, we've got some wet dollars. So, a lot of us are trying to look at how do we diversify our workforce this will go around with the wet dollars. Innovation can be used. I warn against innovation a lot of times because people tend to use innovation as seed money. And the problem is your innovation monies are one time, either 3 or 5 years, and then it becomes a sustainability issue. So if possible, you want to look at how do you get involved with more of the PEI side. There's nothing stopping utilizing also community supports and services, CSS plans and projects to address those disparities. You could have a population specific FSP. So those can be done. They're just, they don't align as well with community defined practices, where I think the PEI comes in. Community engagement, because of the MHSA plans, counties are already having to do a lot of that community engagement. It's a great way to commingle some of the work that they're doing in terms of community engagement and community planning with our ESM work, which is getting to engage the community, doing some needs assessments, finding out where again the gaps are and utilizing those to form the strategy. And I just want to warn that capacity for each county varies. I'm fortunate here in Fresno County, being a larger county, we just have a lot more resources available to us. As a division manager who has a title ESM, I report directly to our director. So I don't have 5 levels to go through to get approval. I also am fortunate that I have a full-time diversity services coordinator on my team that is able to dedicate 100% of their time to that. So we kind of split the function where they do a lot of the day-to-day, more internal system of care. And I try to do more like the micro versus macro. Mine is the macro. Mine is more involved with the state level, trying to look at big picture and really allowing them to do that. But in some counties and in small counties where I've worked, that job is going to be, you're going to be the one person writing the plan. You're going to be the one person pulling the data. You're going to be the one person doing the community engagement. So understanding, depending on the size county you're in, there may be some limitations. So it's not always that a person's not responsive or they don't want to do it. It just may be they only have so many hours in the day. So forming those relationships is really important, getting to know who they are. You don't want to show up like at the last minute and drop something on their doorstep and say, hey, can you help me with this? But forming those relationships, finding out what they have going on, being able to be a support, say, hey, you know what, for your CCP, for your community planning process, would you want us to assist with that? So when we did our community planning process for our MHSA 3-year plan, we worked with a couple of our community providers who are also the CRDP. So I saw Yolanda was on this call from the West Fresno Family Resource Center. They hosted one of our CCPs in West Fresno and helped get 25, 30 people to where we had done one in West Fresno maybe a month earlier at one of our local churches, and we had 6 participants. But being able to work with those community organizations, she was able to mobilize and get us 20 some odd people, at lunchtime. We worked with the Fresno Center, which is one of the other CDEP providers here in Fresno with the Hmong Helping Hands. And they got us, they assisted us with doing 2 simultaneous. So we had one room, we had a fully Spanish speaking community planning process was facilitated in Spanish, no interpreters. Then we had one for our API Southeast Asian group where I had to use the interpreter because there was a room of like 80 something people and most of them had English as a second language. So I got to be the one this time to actually experience a translator kind of the other way around, which was really, I think is beneficial. And so again, working with our community partners, we would have maybe got 5, 10 versus working with a community partner. They packed a room with 80 some odd people. So you guys can really be assets. And I think that creates the win-win of like, look, you want information, I've got the people. Let's marry those together. So can you go to the next slide, Daniel? I want to make sure I get through this quickly so I'm not cutting into your time. How to get involved. Every county should be having a cultural competency committee. That's one of the things that are required. It's one of the criterions. It's one of the things that, we have to demonstrate in audits that we have, whether through agendas, minutes, resource lists. Stacie, I think you guys had worked on a number of years ago of trying to kind of review lists to see, who are on the committees? Do they have, how are they representing, underserved communities? How do we make sure we have diversity? Making sure that those committees are public. Most of them are public. I just don't know if they're always at times that might be either accessible and or sometimes there may be challenges with getting the word out. So again, working with community partners is a great way to get the word out, to invite people. I know when I was in Kings at one point, we had looked at trying to shift the meeting from a daytime meeting to maybe something that was like after hours to make it more accessible for maybe the community. And we really didn't get too many people show up, and it became harder for some of our providers because they were like, well, our people are off at 5. If you have a meeting that goes from like 5:30 to 7:30, they're either having to adjust schedules or overtime and so you have to explore. Virtual gives us now because people don't have to worry about travel. They could be in far away parts of your county. If you're, for example, in Eastern Sacramento County, you don't have to drive all the way to downtown Sac to do a meeting. You can just now do it from your phone with the virtual. So there's a lot of those options to get involved. We try to go right before COVID. I'm going to blame COVID for everything. We had started trying to do a recruitment process of really going through our roster and looking at in Fresno, who are the CBOs who work with our underserved populations who are not at the table and trying to invite them, including some of the organizations that work with our Mexico and Central American indigenous populations, because we knew there were some out there. We didn't know really who and where they were. So bringing organizations like that to the table so that there is a voice, or how do we get more of our LGBTQ providers to the table? So there's, again, a great opportunity where you guys can say, hey, you know what, we can provide you with some of not just the as providers that information, but we can provide you with community members if you want. We can provide you with maybe partners that you have in the community. Public hearings, there's a lot of times public hearings that are done with anything related to MHSA, annual updates, innovation plans, great way to get involved. And again, ask and say, hey, do you guys post your public hearings? Can you add us to the listserv for things like that? And again, a way that you can become involved in that. And like I said, the CCPs, those are required to be public. They should be open. Again, different counties do it differently based on capacity. A lot of times, if you have limited resources, you may do a few, or you may be a county small enough to where if you do 3, you may have reached like every incorporated community in your county. Versus for us, when we did our CCP about 2 years ago, in about a 2-month span, a little under 2 months, we did 21 in-person forums in Fresno. We did them on the weekend, we did them on the evening, we did them during the day, we did them at nighttime, we did them on college campuses and school campuses. We did them with, like I said, some of our CBOs. And when we work with our CBOs and our partners, we ask them, what's the best time? What's the best date? What food should we bring? What incentives are useful? Having our partners at the Fresno Center with a large API population, specifically Southeast Asian population, they said, don't bring gift cards. They said gift cards are just too cumbersome for some of our elderly population to navigate, especially if you bring them like an Amazon gift card, which now they've got to have an Amazon account and then they've got to set it. It's just too hard. They said, bring items and raffle them off. And we said, okay, we'll bring $200 worth of items to raffle off. What should we raffle off? And they were like, rice cookers. And I was like, okay, seriously, like, because I was like thinking like, okay, well, that's kind of insulting to just assuming that. And they were like, no, you don't understand. Like, if you bring rice cookers, utensils, these are things they can go home tonight and use and do. So I didn't make an assumption of like, I'm going to bring rice cookers. And somebody be like, this is really offensive. This guy brought rice cookers for Asian. But when talking to the community, they're like, no, bring for elderly people. They're not going to go on Amazon. They're bring them. And so we got, really nice ones and fancy ones and stuff like that. And you saw people were really excited, like, ooh, I hope I win that one. So again, that's, I think, part of the cultural humility. I didn't want to presume to know what's going to work best, and really working with the community and those providers to tell us, no, don't bring cards, bring cooking utensils, bring pots and pans. And I was like, okay, dude, like, I'm trusting you. So again, working with the community planning process is a great way for you guys to help inform that. We did some, like I said, specifically in Spanish. We did some that were specifically for LGBTQ communities, and that came from our community as far as it was a safety concern. Hey, if you advertise this is an LGBTQ focus group, could I be targeted as this? So that was one that we just said there was LGBTQ, email for more info, and we worked again with our community partners and can you disseminate this information? Can you get it to the community so we don't have to necessarily risk safety concerns? So that's another example. Do I have another slide, Daniel? Or am I done? I think you're on mute, Daniel.
No, you got another one there.
Okay, I'm gonna go through this quick because I don't want to cut into your time.
No problem. Take your time, please.
So who develops a plan and what they're trying to achieve? They should not be check boxes. I can say, at least with a lot of the ESMs I work with in our central region, we don't view these as check boxes. They really do put a lot of time and effort into doing these plans right. I do know that, again, for a lot of us, it's a challenge because it's a lengthy process. If you're trying to do something that's not a checkbox, you do have limited capacity sometimes. So a great way of being able to address that is to have data. So the plans should be data driven. You don't want to use them based on conjecture and speculation. Oh, I think this is what the community needs. No, go do a needs assessment, get input from the community. Go find out who's being served and not being served and include that. So they should be data driven. DHCS does focus a little too much, although they haven't given us feedback in 10 years. We've submitted plans and we've gotten no feedback. They had put CIBHS and they contracted with CIBHS to evaluate our plans and create some recommendations. And after CIBHS was almost done with the project, they go like, oh yeah, there's no more funding. So we're just going to not do that. So if you have relationships with CIBHS, like some of us do, we were able to call and say, hey, can you give me what you had found in our plan? And they've been able to give us some feedback like, hey, these were the really good parts. These are things we would suggest. But again, the counties as a whole have not really gotten feedback on these plans in almost 10 years, which kind of makes it frustrating. So they do require a lot of data information in there. And so two things with the data, we have data gaps in our system because the data gaps often are based on actual service delivery of clinical services or SUD. It doesn't capture a lot of times the prevention information. And if you guys that are work within PEI, there's no equivalent of a statewide EHR database to do PEI. So one of the challenges we run with PEI being prevention, early intervention, is that information doesn't really get captured in our electronic health records. Our electronic health records are really more geared for clinical and traditional treatment and also billing. So when you're talking about like community resource fair, outreach, stigma reduction activities, things like that, there's not a way to really capture those in the EHRs. And they vary in terms of what you're trying to measure for. So I know in Fresno, we're working with the RAND Corporation to evaluate our PEI programs. And part of that work is to create a space where we could start collecting that data kind of standard by strategy and get better. A lot of counties struggle with that. So with the plans, when you're looking at it, there are gaps in there. And that's why it's really, really critical programs that are doing community level to have data that can be submitted to counties to include in the plan. Because if not, we're continuing to miss our underserved and inappropriately served program because that data is not readily available. And if, our CRDPs who work with those communities aren't collecting the data, and it's not that they don't find it important, but they're very focused on the service delivery, but they don't have the data. Well, then we continue to be in this kind of perpetual cycle where we don't have enough info on our underserved communities to then either justify or be able to demonstrate the need for it. So then it continues in this way. You don't have the numbers to justify this. Well, I don't have the numbers because I don't have the data. I don't have the data because so it's really important if you can to do that. And I think that could be a big game changer with the CDEVs having data, being able to give that data in a way that the counties can utilize in their plans. And one of the great things that some of the folks that were involved with this work, Stacie remembers Will and Connie Gustafson and the likes. So with CIBHS, they had done some efforts a couple of years back, which was to help redesign the ESM framework, the Ethnic Services Managers framework, and provide some guidance and helping us write these plans. And the biggest thing that they to us is tell your story. Yes, compliance is fine, but tell your story and use the data not to check the box, but use the data to tell the story of your county. So a lot of counties are trying to utilize that data to tell the story. And that story being, where are disparities? Where are the gaps? Where are the successes? Where do we need to do? And again, if we don't have community-based partners who are really working at that grassroots level and have that pulse of what's going on, giving us data that we can use, we end up omitting a large section of our community. Like I said, we perpetuate this kind of cycle of health disparities. So it's really important to do that. When you reach out to your counties, they, at this point, when it comes to some of the work you're doing, prevention data, they may not even know what they need from you. Some of them may, some of them may not. So kind of think about general things, demographics, think about, outcomes. What is your program meaning to do? Who's it trying to serve? And being able to say, hey, this program served 500 people with the intent of addressing A, B, and C. And those become things that they can help tell stories in. And being able to, assist with, hey, if you do ever your own type of needs assessments, things like that, offer those up, because those are things that could be cited in a report, right? So I could go, well, you know what? Daniel, who works with provider A, B, and C, did this needs assessment, and this is what it yielded. We're not taking that information into consideration for next year's A, B, and C. And that could be a drive. Hey, we're going to look at how do we develop a training. We're going to look at, hey, how do we need to improve engagement? Hey, that may change in terms of, I was going like, we need Daniel at our next community planning process, and we maybe need to do a focus group or community forum with him and his group to get that information, into our plan and help strategize. So just understanding that they have a ton of work. If you come to them and are offering some, more work on their lap, they might be a little reluctant. But that doesn't mean reach out in a way of just, hey, can we get added to your community listserv? When do you guys have your cultural competency meetings? When do you have public, can we get added? And those are ways to start getting informed and seeing, maybe emails that are coming through and start hearing what's going on, be able to say, hey, you know what? I saw you guys were working on that. Can we help? Hey, we may have some data. Would you be interested in that data? And really creating those win-win partnerships. Because if not, it just feels like, okay, I've got the community asking me for stuff. I got the department asking me for stuff. I've got the state asking me for stuff. And they feel just kind of like there's always this demand. And I think if you're able to go like, hey, you know what? I can help you with that. I've got some of the data. I got some of the info. Go like, you know what? Love you guys. Come to the table. You've made like less work for me. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and turn it over to Daniel. Daniel, I'm so sorry. I try to go as quickly as I could. And then we'll wait for any questions toward the end.
No, Ahmad, I think that you were definitely very generous and very wide-ranging in the offerings that you shared with the group. And I think it's clearly part of the objective is to orient folks generally around what the functions of the CCCP plan looks like within each of the counties. And I think you offered both your experience with it, but how the CRDP community can engage with the ESMs and the MHSA coordinator. And there was a lot of information that you shared, and I think pertinent to the group. Stacie, I know that there's some time sensitivity because—
No, don't forget, this goes all the way till 10:30.
Yeah, right,
and so I want you to take your time, and then we will break at 10 to 10 in case people have questions for Ahmad, but you can continue after that, Daniel. So I want you to do all of yours.
Well, I actually want to defer the time to Ahmad because there was so much there. And I was wondering if we could open up the questions to the group themselves, because, here's a person who's working within the county structure.
Okay.
And really have offered ways to the CRDP community to engage with the county and what they can kind of cross-share. So
yeah, that might be better too. I just thought they might have a better understanding of what to ask after they saw some of yours, but maybe we should open it up now, and then that way you can just do your presentation. So
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. if folks would raise your hands if you have any questions directly to Ahmad as the Ethnic Services Manager, and the content of his brief but very impactful presentation, please do so that we can call on you and we could see if you have any questions. Okay, so there's a question, Ahmad, for you from Roland. It says, thinking about the annual cycle of revising these CCPs, when might be the best time of the year to contribute relevant informations or questions to the ESMs and or the MHSA coordinators? Maybe the least stressful time of the year, if there's such a thing.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about that, a great question. Just thinking about that. As far as a least stressful time of year, Daniel, I don't know, because it's always something, right? Like right now, counties are going to start doing work, or they may start doing the work on writing the annual update or their cultural competency plan update, because those are due by December. I don't know if you'll get into those, but so around this time is probably the least stressful because they may not have gotten into writing it yet. So getting some input, but if you're reaching out just to say, hey, can I get involved on the committee? But, you know, when do you guys have these meetings? Things like that. I don't think there'll be any issues with that. This is at the end of the year. So it's at this point kind of gathering information and start working on you know, updates and things like that. So it's probably less stressful than if you were to do it, let's say like in November, December, November, December, you start getting into holidays. So people start losing work days, right? And so they're trying to get more work done with less days. And then the CCPs or cultural competency plans are due in December. So that's probably, if they've waited to the last minute, they may be scrambling. So I don't know if there is a good or bad time, but if you were to reach out even, you know, right now, this would be fine. I think starting out with just, hey, wanted to know how we can participate in just the committees or be on listserv. That's probably not a stressful ask. And if you have some relationships with them, just start saying, hey, you know what, if we can assist or offering, hey, you know, we'd love to set up a call with you sometime just to share. Again, not pitch the programs, because I think that's where they get apprehensive, because it's that they can't make that decision of, yes, I can support or fund or not, but more along the lines of, hey, we may have some data, we may have some information that we can help you with your plan. Then that might make it more enticing, like, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. Because ESMs, even if they report directly to the director, don't have necessarily authority to implement or decide a program or funding. That's not in their scope. So
thank you. Ahmad, Junior Flores has a question. Go ahead, Junior.
Hi, Ahmad. San Mateo County recently put out for bid to work on their cultural competency plan. Is that a common practice?
Yeah, it's especially counties that have maybe limited capacity. I know before I came to Fresno County had contracted with Nancy Callahan from Idea Consulting, and I know she does work with some small counties to really help them revamp some of the work, because Fresno did have a gap in terms of an ESM for a minute. And so it was really, and some of her work was to help the county go back and start over with its cultural competency plan, because if you start like on 2010 and you're adding an update to that each year, it's like, well, are you going back and adding an update to the actual 10, or you're kind of annual updating? So you kind of start to deviate more and more from where you started out. And so, yes, counties will try to bring in consultants. CIBHS had been involved. I remember when I first started as an ESM in Kings County, we had actually contracted with CIBHS and Connie Gustafson, and she had actually come and assisted, for example, Kings County, but way back then, and not so much with our plan, but it was assisting us with how do we set up a cultural competency committee and how do we recruit and engage people for that. And so it definitely is something that counties can explore. We continue to have Idea Consulting as a contractor to help offset some of our work. We had a new diversity service coordinator last year who was awesome and excellent at work with the consultants so that they could absorb and take on a lot of more of those functions. And then they transitioned out to a different position. We've got a new person coming on board. So working with a consultant kind of helps also develop those individuals so they can take it. So it's not unusual to have counties reach for additional help. And it's sometimes good to get a third a different independent perspective, something outside the county, because sometimes what's in the county, they get stuck in terms of doing things. Well, we've always done it this way for the past 10 years, so we're going to keep doing it. And having somebody from the outside sometimes go like, yeah, maybe you should evolve your practices after 10 years. Maybe you should look at some of the changes. So there's definitely benefits to that, Jimmy.
Yeah, but I see that. I mean, I see the outside perspective, but just, working with the communities that are difficult to engage. I mean, how do you get someone who comes in for 6 months and try to engage those communities? So then more often than not, they'll be left out because they won't be involved.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah,
speaking
I
specifically
would.
go ahead.
I don't know what the scope of the work is for the consultant. Like for us, the consultant scope is really just dealing with the department. So they're not engaging or doing the work with the community. It was really more of, how do you pull the data? How do you do data analysis? How do you, translate this data into helping you address those criterions and some of the class standards? Our work is with the community. We work directly with our CBOs, with our partners. We do the recruitment on trying to get people to the table. So I think, your point is absolutely valid depending on the scope. If they're expecting an outside person from outside the county to come and help facilitate community engagement, that might be hard. If they're bringing someone in that's really to help them with some of their internal structures and systems in terms of, okay, this is how you, if they're going to bring someone in to do what Daniel's going to do, this is what goes into the plan, this is how you write it, do those things, then I think you have it's a little easier because they're really just giving you a blue, and then it's really up to the county to go and implement it with the community. But I think it would just depend on the specific scope of that for me. But definitely valid points you made with regard to that.
Thank you. I mean, this is learning for me too. A lot of learning for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if there are any other questions from the group to Ahmad addressing the county's perspective on this cultural competence plans. Let's see. Thank you for tremendous help. You mentioned the absence of feedback about the CCPs and that your county was able to access individual feedback. What about the feedback you received was most and least helpful? That was a question posed by Heliana Ramirez. It's on the chat box.
Let's see, let me look at it. Absence of feedback. Mentioned the absence of feedback about the cultural competency plan. Oh, I mean, I'm presuming, Heliana, you're talking about feedback from the state, right? If so, it becomes challenging because we don't want to have a checkbox, right? If it's a checkbox and we submit it and they just say you've checked the boxes, great. I mean, we don't need their feedback. But as counties, we're not really looking for that to be a checkbox. We're really looking to be able to do the work, to be informed in the work. I think when we don't get feedback, it's two things. It tells me that DHCS may not be at all aware of what's being done in the area and realm of health equity work at the local county. So then they make policies and they put forth mandates and things that they want counties to do without actually knowing what is being done locally. And I think when you don't get feedback, it makes it hard to. So you'll see kind of the trends as far as what you're trying to do around health equity work. But when you don't get direct feedback from, for example, DHCS, then it's saying like, hey, is what we're doing okay or not okay? And there's also what would I say? I'm going to use the word fear factor, but fear is not really the word. But there's a concern of when you don't get feedback and you're doing these things that you really think are going to help improve health equity, reduce health disparities, you're engaging your community, you really think you're trying to address those gaps, and you don't get feedback. There's this concern that does then all of a sudden DHCS come in 3 years later, 5 years later and be like, oh, wait, what have you guys been doing? No, you can't do any of that. And now there's a big, issue with the way you've been maybe designing your services, rendering your services, programs that you set into motion. So that lack of feedback kind of puts you in an unknown. And I want to say it actually maybe provides some reluctance and hesitancy for some counties to do some things. By that, I mean, they may be reluctant and hesitant to, do I fund a CRDP if I don't get any feedback and saying, hey, I want to use CRDPs to close this gap? Am I going to then come back and be like, oh, you couldn't use that money to fund a CRDP because the CRDP falls into, community defined and it's not evidence-based. So now we're going to, slap your hand. So I think the lack of feedback at times causes some concern. And I'm just going to be honest with you, like Stacie said, circle of trust thing. A lot of us sometimes question the usefulness of DHCS's feedback if we did get it, because they really have been, when it comes to the work around health equity and health disparities, they've been disengaged. They don't have an office of health equity. They don't have an ESM for their agency. They don't have a team that's dedicated to providing or addressing health equity work and supporting us. I don't know who reviews the plans we submit. That might be why they haven't been responded to in almost 10 years, because there's nobody there to review them. So I would say, Eliana, one of our concerns is like, if they gave us feedback that you should do A, B, and C, I think some of us would be a little skeptical, like, do you even know what you're talking about? So, and I'm not trying to make this a bash DHCS session. But with some of the work and some of the things that DHCS puts out, ESMs I know around the state and the region get agitated at times, because it's the statements they make or some of the things they look at, it shows a disconnect with the work that is being done with our CDEPs, with our ESMs, with the advances we've been able to make with ASA, to try to address those things. So hopefully that addresses your question. Sorry.
Ahmad, there's a question from Genevieve Flores
Yes.
Haro. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Genevieve.
First, thank you so much for the presentation. Anyways, I won't go to that first comment that came up, but my question is, so I was recently appointed to the Behavioral Health Advisory Board for the County of Ventura. And so my curiosity, given that I'm a new member of that body, is these advisory boards that exist in the county, what is their interaction with these cultural competency plans, and how can I be a good advocate in that space?
Great question, Genevieve. That really varies based on the boards. I've had interaction with 2 boards, so I can only speak to those 2 counties that I've done. When I was in Kings County, because we wanted to elevate the cultural competency plan and the work around health equity, we had elevated it to where we were bringing that plan, small county, again, not a lot of resources. We were bringing our plan each year to the board and presenting the plan to that advisory board and basically having them sign off on it. And then we would email it to the state and post it. And so that was one way for us to make sure that this wasn't something that sat on a shelf, that at least it went to our advisory board. There could be questions. So you might be, in a King County, you may say, hey, what do you do? How did this plan address indigenous populations? Well, we didn't really address that. Okay, well, why didn't you address it? You know what? We weren't aware if there's any, oh, you know what? I can connect you. Here's some, for the future. So that was a way we had elevated it. Here in Fresno County, we get asked by our local behavioral health board to present on those things regularly. Like I know for the August meeting, we're needing to do an update around our work around class standards, which really ties back into with the cultural competency plan. We do have a member of our behavioral health board who sits on and participates in our cultural competency, our cultural humility committee. And so that way they have a person from that body, the advisory board that you're on our cultural humility committee, who also reports out to them as far as so it's not just us as a county saying we're doing A, B, and C, but they have one of their members reporting back to them. So it's getting more hands-on involved that way. They don't formally approve our plan in Fresno, but they do have us present on it at least once or twice a year. We talk about not just the class standards and some of the work, so it goes towards CRDP, or CCP, but also reporting on our training around cultural competency and cultural humility. So we at least once have to kind of give them what are the trainings we've done, how many people have been trained, how are we measuring the effectiveness of them. So it varies. Like I said, one county, it was great to have a board that was like, bring up the plan, tell us what you put in the plan. And that way they're aware of it and helping adopt it. And in another county, while they don't go through the plan, they do require us a couple times a year to report on our efforts. So.
Thank you again, Ahmad, and to those who raised very thoughtful questions from the members of the group. We are time sensitive because Ahmad's going to have to sign off shortly because he's got an 11 o'clock meeting, and we have really to talk about the criteria for the CCP plans, and there are 8 of them. And Stacie would like to make some closing remarks. So at this point, we know you guys have been sitting for some time. We'd like it to take a 5-minute break. And that would mean that you come back at 9:55, and then we'll go on with the second half of the content of this webinar, and then allow Stacie to make some closing statements and her thoughts as far as the history ongoingly with the evolution of the CCPs. So we'll see you back here in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ahmad. For those of you who are just sticking around, I forgot to tell you that Ahmad is really one of the favorite ESMs of the community folks, because he really works hard with the community. And as he said, all the counties are different. So there are other ESMs and MHSA coordinators that are going to be really friendly and very open. There's going to be others that this is, as he said, part of many, many other hats they wear. So this may not be a priority, but Ahmad has had so much experience and he's very committed. And so thanks again, Ahmad, for sharing everything.
Thanks, CAC, Daniel, everyone. Have a great weekend, guys. Be safe.
Stacie, you're too quiet today.
That's because it's Friday. Hi, Fausto.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you? Great to
That's
see
good.
you.
Oh, likewise. How you feeling? I know you weren't you under the weather?
Yeah, I was under the weather this week. Thank you. I feel much better.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
Well, this is probably TMI for everybody. No, I got my blood pressure medication changed, and I hope that makes a difference. So.
Oh, let's hope so.
So everybody, let's come back because it's 9:55 and I want Daniel to get started. And I hope some of you aren't going, wait a minute, I don't even know what this plan is. And, you know, here Ahmad is talking to me. I don't even know what this plan looks like, what's required. And I'm sorry, I realized, and originally I had Daniel first, but because of Ahmad's schedule, we moved it because really I did want you to get to know him. And for those of you, again, that don't know him well, he really is one of the better, well, again, he's actually above an ESM now. I mean, he's been promoted and he would be happy to answer questions if you had them later when you have more of a grasp of this. And again, I realized that what we wanted was Daniel to go first to show you what is actually required in the plan. So go ahead, Daniel.
Welcome back, everybody, and thank you again for everyone's flexibility this morning as far as accommodating the scheduling of today's agenda. And welcome to the CRDP community. And I know for many, it is really probably the first time that you've been in contact with this particular subject matter, cultural competency plans. And we wanted to give you an overview, as Stacie had stated, but also give you a sense of how you might fit in. You as a IPP with a CDEP might fit into the county's discussion around behavioral health systems planning. And also to note that MHSA is only one part of the funding that goes into the county behavioral health system, and it's specifically for non-Medi-Cal participants. And so there's a whole component there around Medi-Cal, and there's some conversations about full service partnerships, et cetera, et cetera. Those acronyms that are specific to the mental health system. So welcome, my name is Daniel. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I'm immigrant and bilingual bicultural Filipino. And I have been in my recent role as LGBTQ TA Center co-project director for nearly 5 years. But in an earlier life, I ran a number of outpatient clinics, integrated behavioral health in 3 counties, San Mateo, Santa Clara, and San Francisco County. I'm familiar with the CCP plans, but each of those counties actually require different things and ask different things. So I think it's critical that we keep that in mind, that each county do actually function very autonomously and uniquely, even though they'll have the same requirements to complete these forms. So my intent is to really kind of give you some of the context, the foundation of the CCP plans, and not really go into the specifics, which means what is required of each of these criteria, to really give you an overview of the criteria that are being required of this. So I'm going to go ahead and start moving my slides. So this really actually does codify what the mental health plan looks like and what needs to be submitted to the Department of Mental Health. And that's really what the purpose of this conversation is about. And if you want to look at the specific guidelines on this, I've offered it. It is a notice within the DMHS. For those of you who are contractors already within the community mental health systems, you're quite familiar with these DMH information notices. So this is the codification of it. But there are 8 criteria that are involved in the cultural competency plans, and I'm just going to go over those very quickly. The first is the commitment to cultural competence. The second is updated assessments of these service needs. And what strategies and efforts do you have, each of the counties that is, to address and reducing racial, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic mental health disparities? Criterion 4 is really specifically to the needs of the consumers and their involvement in this, the client, family member, the committees, and the communities the integration of these committees within the community mental health system. As you may note, there's been a strong advocacy movement within the consumer clients within the last 2 decades, and they're really becoming embedded into the planning processes of the county system. And then the counties are asked to respond to what trainings they made available to the system. And, you know, again, it's an inventory in terms of their multicultural workforce, their hiring and retentions of culturally, linguistically appropriate staff. As we all kind of have said, we kind of move beyond competency and really look at humility and responsiveness as areas that we want to move, being culturally and linguistically appropriate in meeting the needs of our very diverse population here in California. And criterion 7 really looks at the current staff pattern within each of the counties. And it really is an inventory of the language capacity. And criterion 8 really asks the counties to speak specifically around what they've done to adapt their current service system to meet the needs of historically underserved population or inappropriately served population.
Hey, Daniel, I apologize for interrupting, but I'm not seeing your slides, rather I'm seeing your image. So maybe you need to share a different part of your screen.
Oh, how strange.
Or are others seeing his slides?
Yeah, others are seeing his slides. Is this Juan? Maybe you need to change
Yeah.
your view.
Oh, there it is. I need to change my view, and I very much apologize. Sorry.
Oh, okay. That's fine. Now I have to, yeah. So those are the 8 criteria. Thank you, Roland, for pointing that out. And here's the purpose of it. And I just want to let you know, I pulled this out of the 2010 change that took place. Everybody's kind of hinted at. So I underlined for you really what is the primary focus so that you don't get dense into reading the material. So it really looks at a full systems planning and integration. And it assesses the most current resources and standards available in the field of cultural and linguistic competence with the intention of reducing mental health service disparities. You know, and clearly what's integrated here is that mental health services disparities that are identified by racial, ethnic, cultural, linguistic, and other unserved and underserved populations. And these are to meet the needs specifically of California's diverse communities who are being served within the mental health system care and who might be needed to be brought into the mental health system of care. Some background on this. So there was some historical points of references here. The 2002 really states that future CCP requirements should evolve as more experience through the plan development and implementation has progressed. And then in 2010, there was that revision was an outcome of these advances in the field. However, as was already shared by Ahmad, really since 2010, there's been very little available information, not only in the feedback of their plans, but any modifications so that, you know, they are responsive to the needs of a diverse, increasingly diverse community. And the 2010 revision really looks at operationalizing cultural competence at both the organizational and contractor level. And we do want to state that historically in 2002, most of the standards were specific to organizations. And with the 2010 revision, it really looks at not only the system itself, but with the contractor also being participant in the quote, accountability and transparency intentions of the county mental health systems. And it's closely aligned with the national standards, which are culturally linguistic appropriate services, better known as CLAS. And at one point, we actually would like it to crosswalk both the CLAS standards as well as the criterions for the CCP plans at the county level, because they're very much interrelated. And so criteria 1 really talks about competence in itself. And the underlying rationale undergirding it is to really determine the readiness of the service delivery system to meet the cultural linguistic needs of the target populations, right? It's really a commitment from the county to make sure that they're ready to respond. The second criteria is really to think specifically around the necessity of identifying cultural and linguistic needs of the populations that are being served within the county or not being served by the county. And there's a note somewhere in this that actually the counties will provide, actually the state office will provide the county of what are threshold languages, which are really the population makeup of each of the county's jurisdiction, and threshold languages are determined by adjacent zip codes, and what the percentages of that the population who might speak in the language other than English are considered part of the threshold languages criteria. Given that there is now some striking disparities in the mental health system, and acknowledging that they have limited access, and also the availability of these services are not standardized or not really made available to certain communities, they saw in this rationale that they want to address, the quality of care that folks are receiving within the system. And in this criterion, I think what was implicit here is that the needs of the populations could continue to persist if they're not met at an earlier period. So I think what's really curious about this is that if the counties are not updating their demographic, as well as their linguistic needs, there are definitely going to be other populations that are not going to serve. And I think Ahmad pointed to that very clearly, that there is going to be a data quality gap here, and there's a role in which the CDEP community and the CRDP community can participate and contribute. Under this criteria, really, competent organizations, are responsive and deliver services through a community collaborative process. And I think Ahmad has talked about the community planning, and yet it's another opportunity for the CDEP community to really engage. And it should be informed and influenced by the community's interests, expertise, and needs, right? So this is an area where you could look at a lever in which CDEP community can really access and support the development of these plans, but also in ensuring that the county is continually responding to the diverse communities that are, within the counties. And I think that there is an agreement, at least implicitly and commonsensically, that patients and consumers will be receiving services that are most acceptable to them, most efficient and effective. Again, that particular rationale drawn from the class standards, the most recent final report. I think here, Stacie, did you have a question?
You skipped 5. I think you accidentally skipped 5.
There you go. Sorry. Training really, it's kind of an inventory of the current activities that the system has engaged in. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. My fingers are moving a little too fast here. It's really an inventory of the kinds of training services that are provided system-wide, right? So that it's not just siloed into one CBO that's meeting the needs of a particular community, but really the whole system is making sure is to ensure are not only getting the orientation around these population and cultural needs, but really start at some point level, start to modify or adapt the current services so that the system is available, the services are available throughout the whole county, not just specifically to one CBO. But that I think is a more long-term aspiration of the class standards. And I think what is critical under this particular criteria is that some recognition that the staff in itself is not sufficient condition for the system or an organization to be responsive in the both cultural and linguistic domains of service systems. So what it really looks at is looking at the whole rather than just the critical components, so that diversity and culture is at all levels of the organization. The language capacity issue, and I think is most seen at the front lines, really looking at the availability of bilingual interpreters and translators, and I think what is kind of the evolving piece of this particular criteria is that there are now considerations for certifying bilingual, bicultural mental health workers, so that so that they are able to work in collaboration with families, family members, the patient, as well as the provider, in ensuring that the care is meeting the needs of that particular individual who may belong to a specific community that warrants having both cultural and linguistic support. And I think the 8 is more really for the benefit of the client, right? And one can think about it in those terms, that the organization is responsive, not a particular staff member, but the organization at all levels offer a client or family member or consumers themselves both an effective approach, but a understandable and respectable care that is pretty much compatible to the beliefs and the practices of that patient, that client, that consumer, both in their preferred language, but also within the cultural context in which that person is really a member of and is familiar with. Stacie, I'm a little time sensitive, so I don't know if you want me to continue with this, so just let me know. You're muted.
Please keep going for a few more minutes. Yeah.
Okay. So there are some timeframes, and it was actually kind of hinted at by Ahmad. Each of the counties submit staggered 3-year cycles on this beginning on 2010. And I want to highlight that for you because some counties will be coming up again on their 3-year submission. So it's timely for those of us in the CDEP community to think about this. But there are also annual updates that are required. So in this case, the 2010 report, which Ahmad had referred to as the first revision, was due in July, and now I think they've moved it to the end of the year. But for those folks, their calendar goes to 2010, 2013, 2016. So if we max this out, if you continue to work out the sequencing, there's an opportunity coming up at 22, right? Which is next year, which is really coinciding with the time that phase 2 would have ended, but now that we have an extension, it allows you some time to really hopefully think about making a contribution into the CCP plan for that particular review. So, and then there's a reschedule for the annual updates, and want to make sure that folks know that these regulatory codes that really codify this reporting not only looks at the mental health plans that are Medi-Cal funded, but also non-Medi-Cal funded. And if you needed more information about this, there's a contact information at the very bottom.
No, that's not good anymore though. Just want to say that's the old one, California Department of Mental Health, Office of Multicultural Services. It's now Department of Healthcare Services. We'll help you find it if by any chance you want it.
Thank you. I'm sorry for that. I didn't get a chance to update the slide. My apologies, everyone. Thank you, Stacie, for bringing that up. And then there's some specific directions, but here, really, what I wanted to point out is that if you become a contractor to the county, you will be asked annually to be submitting the required forms so that then the county will put together an aggregate report inclusive of all of their contractors, not only the county data that Ahmad talks about, because certainly they can pull from their own Medi-Cal billing and electronic medical health records, but whatever data that you collect that's unique to your service system. And not only is it an inventory of sorts, but you also have to offer an analysis and make a recommendation to how to address some of these efficiencies. So there's really very concrete ways in which contractors can have a role within this CCP plan development and also its own submission process. I think this is the one area where there is some accountability because there are some specific timeframes and measurable outcomes that are included within this CCP plan for 2010. In case I don't want to belabor more of this history, I'm so most of this criterions. There are more specific information if you'd like to have some of that, and we're certainly available to respond to that because there are particular measures that go within each of those criteria. What kinds of questions are being posed and what kinds of information are unique to that. So I wanted to go back to Stacie. She's going to round out the history of the CCPs for everybody. Thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And again, I hope you guys aren't getting whiplash because you heard about the process of developing this County Cultural Competence Plan from Ahmad, but then you heard about the actual plan and what's in it from Daniel. And now I'm going to take you back to the state level and complete the history of the CCPs. I really felt that what Ahmad and Daniel had to say was more important. So I really, that's why we broke up the history, because some of you are going, I don't need to know the history. I guess I always feel it's good to know the history because when you really start working on something, you're gonna say, why is this like this? And that's why I like to put the history. So back to 2010, when at the state level, the community advocates were very anxious because we were very happy because those cultural competence plans were actually supposed to be scored by DMH, by state DMH, and the scores were supposed to be posted on a website by DMH. And then that way you could look at your county and compare it to other counties. And frankly, they would do the same. And that is a way to get them to take this more seriously or try to improve their score. However, after DHCS received the responsibility of the cultural competence plans, remember when Governor Brown again broke up the Department of Mental Health, what happened? Well, DHCS did form, again, with all these community stakeholders kind of banging at their door at the state level, an ad hoc advisory committee was formed, but it only had 7 people from the community on it. All the meetings were closed and it only met a few times. That's, again, not very like the MHSA, but this is not related to the MHSA, so they didn't have those principles. But at least we got them to have a committee. I'm not sure what went on because they did not invite us, REMHDCO, to be a member of that committee. The review of the 2010 CCPs was never completed because the Department of Mental Health was in the middle of that cycle and they were scoring these plans. And then again, the department got broken up. It was transferred to DHCS and DHCS never completed scoring them. REMHDCO kept going to them going, when are you going to finish scoring these plans so we could see how the different counties did? And they just finally admitted, we're not going to do that. We don't want to do that. And so we said, okay. And then as Ahmad said to you, counties never received clear direction on how to continue submitting their plans. So on one hand, before all of this, we were a little bit frustrated with the counties, right? But frankly, we're way more frustrated with DHCS because they're not talking to the counties. They're giving them absolutely no direction on what they're supposed to do. So even if a county never turned in a plan, I'm sure most of them turned in their plans, but even if a county didn't turn in a plan, there's no penalty. So anyway, next slide, please, Daniel. So in 2016, REMHDCO, again, in an effort to keep a highlight on the CCPs, we negotiated in our contract with the Mental Health Services Oversight and Accountability Commission. We said, well, we want to do some kind of review of the cultural competence plans. And of course, we knew we only had a year. We knew we couldn't do a comprehensive review of all of these plans. So we just focused on criterion 4, which has to do with the cultural competence committees. And we got the blessing of CBHDA, or the County Behavioral Health Directors Association. But even though we had that blessing, because we're not a state entity, the counties really were not forthcoming. And only out of 58 counties, only about 30 would return our questionnaire. So it was very difficult. And then because the OAC didn't want to publish that study that we did, they didn't even bring it up to the commission. So now it is 2021. So even if some of the counties hadn't done very well, they're going to go, well, that was 5 years ago. So now all of that work we did was really, I think, kind of a waste. Anyway, that's the way government goes sometimes. In 2018, we were delighted to find out that the California Pan-Ethnic Health Network, CPEN, introduced AB 512 by Assemblymember Ting. And this would codify and strengthen the CCPs, requiring counties to set forward-looking goals in their CCPs and enforce DHCS to review and monitor them. However, unfortunately, the governor vetoed the bill. But oddly enough, this was kind of interesting because I didn't know this to happen a lot. CPEN had a bill, and then they had corresponding budget item, $8 million earmarked to implement AB 512. So that was kind of interesting. He vetoed the bill, but he put money in the budget. But then this happened very recently, well, within the last couple of years. So after negotiations with the state, that 8 million that was supposed to go originally to, again, strengthen the CCPs. This is not bad. And you guys this should sound familiar to you. After negotiations with the state, $5 million of that 8 million went to OHE and Department of Public Health for the CRDP IPPs for COVID relief. Now, you guys haven't gotten it yet, I know. So, but again, that's where that money came from. And then 3 million goes to DHCS for contracting with the CBO to assist the counties with CCPs. And I just want Heliana Ramirez to do a quick hello so you could meet her, because it was CARS that was awarded, was the CBO that was awarded this contract with DHCS. Heliana, do you want to just say hi to everybody?
Hi, everyone. My name is Eliana Ramirez. I am so honored to be joining this work with all of you. And I'm sorry, Regina. No, okay. So we are in the very early stages of project startup with the Community Mental Health Equity Project. And I am really honored, as I say, to join this work with so many of you who have been doing the work prior to CMHEP. I look forward to meeting you all.
Thank you, Heliana. We're very happy to meet you. Okay, and Daniel, could you go on? We'll try to wrap these up. So my closing thoughts. you know, you may be asking yourself, once you get a chance to look at these cultural competence plans or think about them, you're going to go, why are these? I mean, we're worried about it's just a plan. Why isn't the county held to more results oriented? Like how much did you reduce your disparities or whatever? Well, the answer is because the whole process of the cultural competence plan was developed by government staff, right? The ESMs and Rachel, as wonderful as they are government staff. So they're, again, instead of what they would say, they don't want to beat each other up. So they have this thing that's a plan. So really, there's no penalty. So they could have this beautiful plan to reduce disparities. But guess what, folks? If they don't do anything, even if it was a great plan, they're not penalized in any way. The only thing, I mean, I don't want to be cynical, but again, it's good because if they have a plan, then it's people like you, community advocates, that could go, you need to follow your plan. So that's what that's for, because there really is no penalty. So how does all this relate with the sustainability of your CDEP, excuse me. Okay, the county behavioral health departments are supposed to use the CCPs in development of their MHSA 3-year plans, in prioritizing goals for the departments and development of their RFPs, etc. Do they use this CCP, the Cultural Competence Plan, in doing all that? They're supposed to, there's no guarantee. Go ahead, Daniel. So I don't want to mislead you to think we're giving you a magic bullet answer here. So then what good does it do me to get involved with the development of the CCP in my? This is a long-term strategy for you to develop a relationship with your county behavioral health department, because becoming a part of the mental health community at the county, it's important, and you need to know really kind of how things work. Next slide, Daniel. I'm going to save time for questions. Okay, that is the end. Here are some references for you that you can look up when we give these to you. So the requirements for small counties are slightly different than for larger counties. So this is okay. So we only have a few minutes, but I really want to open it up for questions. Yikes. I always am nervous when there's not a lot of questions. Was it too basic or was it too complicated? I'm sorry. You guys are quiet.
Hi, Stacie, this is Juan. I appreciate the information that both you and Daniel. I came in late, so I didn't see, I think Ahmad was on earlier.
Yes.
And I've been familiar with the class standards it's been around for about 20 years, right? Came from the Surgeon General's, it says Surgeon General's United States spinoff. But I had mentioned to Daniel in a chat that there was another format to help agencies become more multiculturally competent, and that came from the California Brief Multicultural Scale Model.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I remember I was going to a CIMH, and I forget who was doing the training, but I know it was under Rachel when she was there. And it was pretty powerful model, you know, where it started out with the idea of a multicultural delivery of services had to start with a multiculturally competent board of directors. So if your board of directors, and it gave you like 2 or 3 different models, if your board of directors was not interested in multicultural, it made it more difficult to actually implement, you know, at the customer client level. And then if it was partially, you know, there was organizational issues. But what I liked about the CBMCS model, and this was about 2010, 2012, just around the same time that you're talking about, you know, they gave you a plan for how to implement a board that was culturally competent, that would then, you know, of course, it was more of a trickle down type of model rather than from the bottom up. But I appreciated it, and I'm just wondering if you were familiar with it.
I mean, I'm not familiar with the details, but I know about that. I know that it was the dream of the ethnic services managers that the counties were required to take that training. But, you know, at that point, the counties were not interested in, you know, making mandates on themselves. And the state, again, especially after DHCS took over, was not interested in enforcing anything like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was very good, that training model, I heard.
Yeah.
Stacie, you know, I'm part of the committee of the culture committee right here in Fresno, in
Yes.
Fresno County. And then I know that we often reaching and searching for more cultural training for their staff. So I know that Ahmad is very involved in that. And then him and I, we have talked about that before, and then we have reached on those as well. They've done a lot of research on that, on culture community models and stuff like that, so to present for their employees.
Well, I'm glad. So I hope everybody heard that. If you want more information on training that would be helpful for county staff, you could talk to Fausto or Juan. So I know we're past time, but again, did anybody else have any closing comments or questions? And you know what, I forgot to develop this, but we will send you a questionnaire on what was helpful or not so helpful for this training. But I really want to thank everyone for attending. And I think that wraps it up, right, Daniel?
Yep, and I think I wanted to say thank you as well. And for the close of this, yes, we will make these available to everyone. We'll send out the PowerPoint. And if you would want the actual reporting document, we could certainly send out the most recent version of the CCP plan, kind of from the state's required. So thank you again.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Stacie and
All right,
everyone.
thank you, Stacie.
Thanks. I'm hanging around. So because I got to figure out how to save the recording. So if you have any questions or you want to talk to me, just hang around. Daniel, can you remove the so I can see people? Hi, Phyllis. Hi, Regina.
Okay,
Hi.
I've taken off the stop share, sure. Stacie,
Eliana,
so
did you find that? Oh, she left. I was going to say if she found that helpful because
she did actually. She put that on the chat box.
Yeah.
So you know, under the record button that you have,
Yeah.
that's where you can either store it on the cloud or you can store it locally in your computer.
You know what? It scared me because I didn't know what to put there. I put locally, so I hope that my computer is. Because I don't know how to access the cloud. So
Okay, but okay, so there are two options if you press record, but if you already put it into your computer, then it should be saved and there'll be 3 different files. They'll show up. And
how come 3?
Because there's an audio, a video, and then there's just whatever it is that brings them all together.
Oh,
so,
thank you, Daniel.
Don't hang up because don't hang up till it shows you that the recording is complete, because it usually takes a little bit of time since it is being recorded into your computer. So that's the only thing that you cannot do is hang up. Everybody else could hang up, but don't hang up your computer. So thank you, everyone. We don't want you to hear about the background of how we're trying to record and save this recording, but yeah, it does take a little bit longer for it to be downloaded to your computer.
So what, I have to be the last to leave or what? What do you mean?
Don't turn it down till you get a notice. You will get a notice from your Zoom. They'll give you your Zoom notice letting you know that the recording is completed.
Do I have to keep the Zoom on?
Yes, you have to keep on this particular Zoom channel open.
Whoa, I'm glad you told me that, Daniel.
Yeah, no, because people have lost it when they put that record in this computer option.
Thank you. Oh my God, that's very helpful. And so I'll be seeing you at 11. Right?
Yeah, I'm going to be on that call for sure.
And I'm saving the chat. And Angel, are you there or did you walk away? It's a nice picture of you.
Yeah, she might not have just hung up yet. So I'm gonna leave, but you can't leave, Stacie.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
I'll just, I can, oh yeah, there
Okay.
she goes. Okay, I promise.
All right.
Thank you for telling me that, Daniel.
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay, see you at 11.